He hit print, and I watched from across the room, smiling. 13 pages, one by one. They emerged from the printer. Not a single line of data was correct. But he didn't know that. The Denver office hummed with its usual Monday morning energy. Keyboards clicking, coffee brewing, hushed conversations about weekend plans. Someone in our team had stolen the strategic data file I'd spent an entire month building. The file that could make or break our $3 million deal with Apollo Grid. But I wasn't angry. I was just waiting. My name is Madeline Rhodes, Maddie to anyone who's worked with me longer than a week, and I've been architecting data systems for 12 years. At 34, I'd built more databases than most people have had hot meals, and I knew every line of code in Stratus Link Solutions infrastructure like it was my own heartbeat. That Monday morning in our glass-walled Denver office, I sat at my desk watching Travis Langley stride toward the printer with the confidence of a man who'd just won the lottery. He'd dressed up for the occasion, Italian shoes that clicked against the polished concrete floor, a suit that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. The printer whirred to life, spitting out page after page of what he believed was my work, my month of sleepless nights. My breakthrough solution for Apollo Grid's data integration nightmare, 13 pages in total. I counted each one as it landed in the tray. The thing about data architecture is that it's like building a house of cards in zero gravity. One wrong calculation, one misplaced variable, and the entire system collapses. But Travis wouldn't know that. He'd been promoted to team lead 3 weeks ago, despite having the technical knowledge of a first-year intern. Management loved his smile, his firm handshake, his ability to make complex problems sound simple even when he didn't understand them himself. I sipped my lukewarm coffee and remembered the moment I discovered the theft. Thursday, 2:47 a.m. I'd been running final validation tests when I noticed someone had accessed my private directory. Not just accessed, copied everything. Then, with surgical precision, revoked my permissions from the main report folder. By morning, Travis was presenting my preliminary findings to the C-suite as his own, suggesting that I'd been struggling with the technical requirements. The Colorado sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the open office space. Around us, 24 employees typed away, oblivious to the small war playing out between their desks. Strategic analyst positions starting at $95K, senior developers pulling in $130K. And then there was my role, the one they'd never quite figured out how to value because so few people understood what I actually did. Travis gathered the papers from the printer, tapping them against the counter to align the edges. Perfect. He glanced my way, and I offered him a small nod, the kind you'd give a stranger on the street, polite, meaningless. He had no idea that I'd spent the weekend preparing something special just for him. Big day today, Jessica from marketing chirped as she passed by with her green smoothie. I heard Apollo Grid's entire tech team is flying in for the presentation. Should be interesting, I replied, turning back to my monitor. The email notification blinked in the corner of my screen. A reminder about the 2 p.m. meeting, Conference Room A, the one with the best view of the Rockies, the one where careers were made or destroyed. I pulled up my real data model, the one hidden behind 3 layers of encryption on my personal server. Beautiful in its complexity, elegant in its simplicity. It would have saved Apollo Grid 6 months and roughly $2 million in implementation costs. Would have, if Travis hadn't decided to play corporate pirate. But pirates, I'd learned, sometimes find treasure chests filled with fool's gold. The office filled with the familiar sounds of Monday morning productivity. Someone's kid was sick. Someone else was complaining about the Broncos' performance. Normal life carrying on while I sat at my desk, calm as a frozen lake, knowing that in 5 hours, everything would change. I opened a new terminal window and began typing. Not the stolen data, not the real solution, just routine maintenance, the kind of boring, methodical work that made me invisible in this ocean of ambition and testosterone. Let them think I was bitter. Let them think I'd given up. Let Travis believe he'd won. He hit print, and I watched from across the room, smiling. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold. Sometimes it's served at exactly 2 p.m. in Conference Room A, with a view of the mountains and an audience of executives who don't suffer fools gladly. 13 pages. I knew every word on them. After all, I'd written them specifically for this moment. 3 months earlier, I'd been the only person at StratusLink who truly understood the new data architecture our biggest client was preparing to implement. It wasn't arrogance, it was fact. I'd spent 6 years specializing in distributed systems, another 4 in real-time analytics, and had literally written the integration protocols that half of Denver's tech companies were using. When Apollo Grid approached us with their massive data consolidation project, I was the natural choice to lead the technical design. But corporate America doesn't always reward competence. Travis Langley joined our team in January, transferring from the Seattle office with glowing recommendations and a resume that sparkled like fresh snow. Harvard MBA, 5 years at Microsoft, a stint at a successful startup that had been acquired by Amazon. On paper, he was everything StratusLink Solutions loved: pedigreed, polished, and aggressive in all the right ways. In person, he was something else entirely. "Hey, Maddie, got a minute?" He'd appear at my desk at least twice a day, always with that practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. "I'm trying to understand the data flow between the staging and production environments. Could you walk me through it again?" I'd explain, patiently, clearly. With diagrams and analogies designed for a 5-year-old, he'd nod along, make notes in his moleskin notebook, ask questions that sounded intelligent but revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of basic concepts. Then he'd thank me profusely, compliment my expertise, and leave me wondering how someone could get this far without knowing what a primary key was. The promotion announcement came on a Tuesday. Our previous team lead, Sarah, had taken a position at Google, and management needed someone to fill her shoes. The email from HR was brief and corporate cheerful. "We're excited to announce Travis Langley as the new data systems team lead, effective immediately." I remember staring at my screen, coffee mug frozen halfway to my lips. Around me, the office continued its normal buzz, but I felt like I'd stepped into an alternate universe. Travis, the man who'd asked me just last week what SQL stood for. "Congratulations," I'd said when he stopped by my desk that afternoon, trying to inject warmth into my voice. "Thanks, Maddie. I'm really looking forward to working more closely with you." He leaned against my desk, a gesture probably meant to seem casual and friendly. "I know you were probably expecting this position. Sarah mentioned you'd applied." I had applied. I'd also been doing the job unofficially for 2 years while Sarah focused on client relationships. "These things happen," I said, turning back to my monitor. "I'm sure you'll do great." "I'm counting on your expertise," he continued, not taking the hint. "Especially with the Apollo Grid project. From what I understand, you're the brain behind our entire approach." That should have been my first warning. Travis never complimented without calculation. Over the next weeks, his requests became more frequent, more specific. Could I share my documentation? Did I have any sample code he could review? Would I mind if he sat in on my architecture planning sessions? He framed everything as professional development. As a new leader trying to understand his team's work, I helped him. Of course I did, because that's what team players do. And despite everything, I still believed in the work we were doing. Apollo Grid's project would revolutionize how mid-sized companies handled data integration. It was elegant, scalable, and would establish StratusLink as a serious player in the enterprise space. The workspace around me reflected the modern tech aesthetic: standing desks, multiple monitors, mechanical keyboards that clacked like typewriters, young developers in their uniform of jeans and startup t-shirts, project managers with their color-coded calendars and stress balls. And in the corner office with the mountain view, Travis holding court with upper management, using words like synergy and scalable solutions without ever explaining what they meant in our context. He's certainly making an impression. Derek from DevOps had mentioned during one of our coffee runs, Thompson from the C-suite was asking about the Apollo grid timeline. Travis told him we were ahead of schedule. We weren't ahead of schedule. We were exactly where my project plan said we'd be, which Travis would have known if he'd ever actually read it instead of just forwarding it to executives with his name added to the CC line. But I kept quiet, kept coding, kept building the architecture that would save Apollo Grid millions and establish a new framework for enterprise data management. I told myself that good work speaks for itself, that competence would win out over corporate maneuvering. I was wrong. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The way he'd started scheduling alignment meetings with Apollo Grid without including me, how he'd asked for administrative access to our development servers for oversight purposes, the subtle way he'd begun referring to the project as our team's initiative in emails, then the initiative I'm overseeing, and finally, just my project. But I was too deep in the code to play politics. Too focused on solving actual problems to notice that in the corporate world, perception often matters more than reality. That would be my second mistake. The first was trusting Travis Langley in the first place. Thursday, 2:47 a.m. The office was a cathedral of darkness, lit only by the glow of my 3 monitors and the exit signs. I'd been running final validation tests on the Apollo Grid integration framework, the kind of meticulous work that requires absolute concentration and 0 interruptions. Coffee number 6 sat cold beside my keyboard, forgotten in the flow of code and calculations. That's when I noticed it. A small notification in the corner of my system log, something most people would miss. Someone had accessed my private project directory at 11:23 p.m. Not just accessed, but performed a full recursive copy. 8 gigabytes of data, including my comprehensive documentation, SQL schemas, API mappings, and the crown jewel, the predictive algorithm that would reduce Apollo Grid's processing time by 80%. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up access logs. User ID, T. Langley, Travis. But he'd been smarter than I'd given him credit for. After copying everything, he'd systematically revoked my permissions from the main project repository, line by line, folder by folder. He'd erased my access while granting himself full administrative rights. The timestamps told the story. A methodical theft executed over 45 minutes. I sat back in my chair, staring at the evidence. Outside, Denver slept under a blanket of stars. Inside, I felt something shift. Not anger exactly, but a cold clarity that comes when illusions finally shatter. By morning, I discovered the full extent of his betrayal. The 9 a.m. status meeting with upper management, the one where I was supposed to present our progress, had been mysteriously rescheduled to 8 a.m. The invitation update had been sent to everyone except me. By the time I arrived at 9, coffee in hand and laptop under my arm, the meeting was over. Oh, Maddie. Travis emerged from the conference room, flanked by executives. Sorry about the schedule change. I sent an update yesterday, but you must have missed it. He hadn't sent anything. I'd checked. No worries, I said, noting how he positioned himself between me and the executives, literally blocking me from their view. How did it go? Fantastic. I walked them through our progress on the Apollo Grid architecture. Our progress? His presentation? Mr. Davidson was particularly impressed with the efficiency gains. Robert Davidson, our CFO, nodded approvingly. Exceptional work, Travis. This is exactly the kind of innovation we need. I watched Travis accept praise for my months of work, saw him shake hands and exchange knowing looks with men who controlled our budgets and bonuses. He'd prepared handouts, my diagrams with his name added as project lead and mine demoted to contributing developer. Actually, Travis added, turning to me with theatrical concern. I noticed you've been putting in a lot of late nights. Maybe we should discuss redistributing some of your workload. I'd hate to see you burn out when we're so close to delivery. The executives nodded sympathetically. Travis, the caring leader. Me, the overworked developer who couldn't handle the pressure. The narrative was being written in real time, and I wasn't even holding the pen. Later that day, I tried to access the main project repository to update a critical component. Access denied. I tried my backup credentials. Access denied. Even my read-only permissions had been revoked. Technical glitch, Travis explained when I confronted him in his office. He was sitting behind his desk, my architecture diagrams spread across the surface like conquered territories. It is looking into it. In the meantime, just send me any updates and I'll make sure they're integrated. Travis, I need direct access to... I understand your frustration, he interrupted, using what I'd come to recognize as his management voice. But we need to think about project security. Apollo Grid has expressed concerns about too many people having access to sensitive data. As team lead, I need to manage these permissions more carefully. Too many people. I was the only person who truly understood the system. Without me, it was just elegant code that no one could properly maintain or modify. Besides, he continued, leaning back in his $800 ergonomic chair. You've done amazing work getting us to this point. Maybe it's time to let others take some ownership, career development, and all that. I stood there, watching him rearrange my work on his desk, and realized this had been his plan all along. Every question, every request for documentation, every friendly coffee chat had been reconnaissance. He'd studied not just my code, but my patterns, my weaknesses. He knew I preferred building to politics, creating to competing. Of course, I said finally, team development is important. He smiled, that practiced, empty smile. I knew you'd understand. Oh, and Maddie, there might be some questions about the prediction algorithm in next week's client meeting. I'd appreciate if you could prepare some notes for me. Nothing too technical. You know how clients get with too much detail. I left his office knowing exactly what would happen next. He'd present my algorithm as his innovation. He'd take credit for months of my work. And when Apollo Grid signed the contract, he'd be the hero who'd saved the company millions. But Travis had made one critical error. He'd assumed that because I didn't play politics, I didn't understand the game. He was wrong about that too. I didn't confront him. I didn't file a complaint with HR. I didn't even update my LinkedIn profile with one of those passive-aggressive, exploring new opportunities messages. Instead, I did what I do best. I worked. Friday evening, after Travis had left for his weekend ski trip to Aspen, he'd made sure everyone knew about it. I stayed late. The office was quiet except for the hum of servers and the distant sound of the cleaning crew. I sat at my desk, fingers poised over the keyboard, and began crafting my masterpiece. First, I restored my access. Not to the main repository, that would have triggered alerts. Instead, I used my backdoor into the development server, a safety measure I'd built months ago for emergencies. Travis didn't know about it because Travis didn't understand the architecture well enough to look for it. I pulled up the stolen files, examining what he'd taken, everything, every query, every function, every carefully crafted algorithm. But data is like a recipe. Having the ingredients doesn't mean you can cook the meal. And Travis was about to serve raw chicken to a room full of food critics. The beauty of my trap lay in its simplicity. I created a parallel dataset, identical in structure to the original, but poisoned with subtle inaccuracies. Not obvious errors that would scream sabotage, those could be caught and corrected. Instead, I introduced elegant falsehoods that would only reveal themselves under scrutiny. The customer segmentation algorithm. I shifted the parameters just enough to categorize enterprise clients as small businesses. The cost optimization model. It now recommended the most expensive solutions as the most cost-effective. The predictive analytics that would forecast Apollo Grid's Q3 performance. Let's just say they'd be predicting snow in July and heat waves in December. But the pièce de résistance was the executive summary dashboard. It looked beautiful. Clean visualizations, intuitive interface, real-time updates. It would demo perfectly, responding to clicks and queries with smooth animations. The numbers would seem reasonable at first glance. 23% efficiency gain here, 31% cost reduction there. Believable, impressive. Completely fabricated. I saved this poisoned version with the same file name as the original, then used a script to backdate the metadata. As far as any system log would show, this had always been the file in that directory. The real data. The work of my sleepless nights and caffeinated mornings. I encrypted and stored on my personal server, a server that existed outside StratusLink's infrastructure. Working late again? I nearly jumped out of my chair. Marcus from security stood in the doorway, flashlight in hand despite the fluorescent lights. Just wrapping up some documentation, I said, heart hammering. He nodded, continuing his rounds. Marcus was good people, a former Marine who took his job seriously but knew when to look the other way. I waited until his footsteps faded before returning to my work. The final touch was an email to myself, sent from my personal account and dated a week earlier. Concerns about data integrity in shared folders. Recommend additional validation before any client presentations. I marked it as read, buried it in my inbox. A breadcrumb for later. Should I need it? By 3 a.m., I was done. I locked my workstation, gathered my things, and walked through the empty office. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, Denver's nightlife continuing while its corporate warriors slept. On Travis's desk, I noticed a printout of my original project timeline with his handwritten notes in the margins. Accelerate delivery. One note read, minimize dependencies on single resources. Read another, single resources. That's what I'd become in his narrative. Not the architect of the solution, just a dependency to be minimized. I drove home through empty streets, NPR playing softly on the radio. The host was discussing a data breach at a major retailer, how one employee's actions had cost the company millions. I smiled grimly. Travis had breached something far more valuable than customer credit cards. He'd stolen trust. And unlike credit fraud, there's no insurance policy for that. Back in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine, the good stuff I'd been saving for a special occasion. This seemed to qualify. My cat, Turing, jumped onto my lap, purring his approval of my late-night return. He's going to print it all, I told Turing, scratching behind his ears. 13 pages of beautifully formatted lies. He'll probably even spiral bind it. Turing meowed, which I took as agreement. I thought about Monday's meeting with Apollo Grid. Their technical team was sharp, the kind of people who'd spot inconsistencies within minutes. They'd ask questions Travis couldn't answer, probe deeper into logic he didn't understand. And when they did, when the facade crumbled, he'd have two choices. Admit he'd stolen work he didn't comprehend, or double down on data he couldn't defend. Knowing Travis, he'd double down. He always did. I finished my wine, set my alarm for a reasonable hour, and went to bed. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. No dreams of code, no anxious reviews of architecture decisions. Just peaceful sleep. The kind that comes when you finally stopped fighting the current and decided to let the river take someone else over the waterfall. Monday would come soon enough. And with it, Travis's promotion-worthy presentation to Apollo Grid. I could hardly wait. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline Colorado sunshine that made everything seem sharper, more defined. I arrived at the office at my usual time, 8:15, coffee in hand, laptop bag slung over my shoulder. Travis was already there, pacing near the printer like an expectant father. Maddie! He spotted me immediately. Good, you're here. Quick question about the data visualization in Section 3. The gradient mapping? I asked, setting down my things with practiced calm. Exactly. It's showing this weird color progression from blue to orange, but shouldn't it be green to red for the standard profit-loss indicators? I tilted my head, feigning consideration. Let me think. What version did you pull? The latest one from Thursday night. Perfect. He'd taken the bait exactly as predicted. Oh, that's the Apollo-specific palette, I said smoothly. They have brand guidelines about color usage in financial presentations. Blue to orange aligns with their corporate identity. His face relaxed. Of course, I should have realized. Their brand book is like 1,000 pages. It was actually 47 pages, and said nothing about data visualization colors. But Travis didn't know that because Travis didn't read brand guidelines any more than he read code documentation. Want me to double-check? I offered, knowing he'd refuse. No, I trust your judgment. He glanced at his watch, a Rolex that had appeared shortly after his promotion. I'm going to run through everything one more time before printing. The Apollo team will be here at 1:30 for lunch, then we present at 2. I returned to my desk, settling into my Monday routine. Email, Slack messages, a few pull requests to review. Normal activities that masked the anticipation building in my chest. Around 10 a.m., I heard the printer whir to life. The sweet mechanical sound of paper feeding through rollers, toner fusing to pages. Travis's future being documented one sheet at a time. He retrieved the stack with reverence, holding it like a winning lottery ticket. 13 pages, just as I'd predicted. He'd even splurged on the good paper, 32-pound premium bright, the kind usually reserved for contracts and final proposals. Looking good, Derek asked, passing by with his third Red Bull of the morning. Better than good, Travis replied, loud enough for half the office to hear. This is going to revolutionize how Apollo Grid thinks about data integration. I bit my tongue and kept typing. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in corporate theater. Travis practiced his presentation in the glass-walled conference room, gesturing at invisible slides, pausing for dramatic effect. He'd had coaching, I realized. Someone had taught him how to present technical concepts he didn't understand, how to deflect questions with confidence, how to promise detailed follow-ups he'd never deliver. At noon, he stopped by my desk again. I might need you in the meeting, he said, trying to sound casual. Just in case there are any deep technical questions. Of course, I replied. Happy to support the team. Support the team. He repeated the phrase like he was tasting wine. I like that. Team player attitude. After he left, I opened the real data model on my personal laptop. The actual solution that would have saved Apollo Grid millions, streamlined their operations, positioned Stratus Link as an industry leader. It was beautiful in its efficiency, elegant in its simplicity. Everything the fake version wasn't. I minimized the window and returned to my busy work. In the kitchen, I could hear the catering team setting up lunch, Thai food, from the smell of it. Apollo Grid's CEO was apparently a fan of authentic pad Ki Mao. Travis had probably researched that too, adding it to his file of surface-level intelligence. You doing okay? Jessica from marketing appeared at my desk, concern in her eyes. I heard about the access issues with the repository. News traveled fast in open offices. All good, I assured her. Just focusing on other projects while IT sorts it out. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Between you and me, I think it's bullshit. Everyone knows you built that entire system. I shrugged. Travis is the team lead. It's his responsibility now. Still. She straightened up, adjusting her cardigan. I hope you get the recognition you deserve. I smiled. I'm sure everyone will get exactly what they deserve. She wandered off, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my secret. 1:00 was approaching. Soon, the Apollo Grid team would arrive. 5 technical leads, 2 VPs, and their CEO, Sandra Nguyen, a former Microsoft engineer who'd built her company from the ground up, the kind of person who could spot architectural flaws like a jeweler identifying fake diamonds. Travis made one final trip to the printer, producing spiral-bound copies of his stolen presentation. The binding machine groaned under the strain, but produced 6 perfect copies. He stacked them carefully on the conference room table, adjusting their alignment multiple times. I watched him through the glass walls. This man who'd stolen my work, claimed my ideas, erased my contributions. He looked confident, prepared, ready to take credit for brilliance he couldn't begin to understand. The elevator chimed. The Apollo Grid team had arrived. I smiled, returning to my screen. In my terminal, I typed a simple command that would log every access attempt to the repository for the next 4 hours. Evidence, should I need it. Documentation of who tried to access what, when, and from where. Then I waited, fingers poised over my keyboard, ready to play the supporting role in Travis's big performance. The show was about to begin. Conference Room A was packed. Sandra Nguyen sat at the center of the Apollo Grid delegation, her technical leads flanking her like generals at a war council. Our C-suite occupied the other side: Robert Davidson, our CFO, Patricia Mills, COO, and James Thompson, our CEO who'd flown in from Seattle specifically for this meeting. Travis stood at the head of the table, clicker in hand, his 13 pages of fiction distributed to each attendee. I sat in the corner, laptop open, playing my part as the supportive team member. "Thank you all for coming," Travis began, his voice carrying the practiced confidence of someone who'd rehearsed in front of a mirror. "What we're about to show you will fundamentally transform Apollo Grid's data infrastructure." Click. The first slide appeared, my architecture diagram, simplified and colorful. Beautiful and completely wrong. Our approach leverages a distributed processing framework that reduces latency by 75%. Travis continued, pointing at metrics that would have been impossible with the configuration shown. Sandra Nguyen leaned forward, studying her handout. I saw her brow furrow slightly, the first crack in the facade. "Impressive numbers," she said slowly. "Can you walk us through the calculation methodology?" Travis's smile never wavered. "Absolutely. As you can see in Section 2, he flipped to page 3, where I'd placed my first major trap. The cost optimization model showed a graph trending dramatically downward, suggesting Apollo Grid could cut their infrastructure costs by 80% while increasing capacity. It was the kind of promise that should have triggered immediate skepticism. "Wait," interrupted Marcus Kim, Apollo's lead architect. "This suggests we'd be running enterprise-level operations on what amounts to startup infrastructure. How is that possible?" "Efficiency gains through our proprietary algorithms," Travis replied smoothly. "The details are in Appendix B." There was no Appendix B, I'd made sure of that. Sandra flipped through her pages, searching. "I don't see." "My apologies, that's in the technical deep dive document." Travis covered, "We'll provide that post-meeting. For now, let's focus on the high-level benefits." He clicked again. The predictive analytics dashboard filled the screen, all smooth animations and impossible projections. According to my fictional model, Apollo Grid would see 340% growth in Q3, during what everyone knew was their slowest season. 340%? Sandra's voice had shifted from curious to sharp. "In Q3, when we typically see a 20% dip?" "That's the power of predictive optimization," Travis said, but I could see sweat beading on his forehead. "By reallocating resources based on what historical data?" Marcus Kim interrupted. "We haven't shared our Q3 numbers from previous years." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia Mills was typing furiously on her phone, probably messaging IT to verify the data source. James Thompson's expression had shifted from proud to concerned. "Perhaps we should look at the technical architecture," Sandra suggested, her tone deceptively mild. "Page 7, I believe." Page 7. My masterpiece of misdirection. A database schema that looked professional but would create circular dependencies. Data loops that would crash any system within hours of implementation. "This schema," Sandra continued, tracing the connections with her finger. "It shows the user authentication table referencing the permissions table, which references the audit log, which references back to the user authentication table." Silence. Travis stared at the diagram like it might suddenly make sense if he looked hard enough. That must be a printing error," he stammered. "It's the same in all 6 copies." One of Apollo's VPs noted. Robert Davidson, our CFO, cleared his throat. "Travis, perhaps you could explain." "Actually," I spoke for the first time, my voice cutting through the mounting tension. "I'd be curious to hear the explanation too." Every head turned to me. "After all," I continued, standing slowly, "I haven't had access to the project repository for over a week. I'd love to understand what changes were made to the original architecture. Travis's face cycled through several colors: white, red, an interesting shade of purple. The original architecture? Sandra Nguyen's voice was dangerously quiet. Who designed the original architecture? I did, I said simply. Over the course of 4 months, until my access was revoked last Thursday at 11:23 p.m. That's not, Travis started. I have the logs, I interrupted, opening my laptop. Every access, every modification, every permission change, time-stamped and authenticated. Sandra stood, gathering her papers with deliberate movements. Mr. Thompson, Mr. Davidson, I think we need to have a very different conversation. Sandra, please. Travis's desperation was palpable. There's been a misunderstanding. Oh, I understand perfectly. She turned to me. Do you have the actual architecture, the real one? I nodded. On my personal server, I can present it whenever you're ready. How about now? James Thompson's voice was steel. Travis, sit down. Maddie, please take over. I walked to the front of the room, passing Travis as he stumbled back to a chair. His 13 pages of lies lay scattered on the table, spiral binding gleaming under the conference room lights. Before we begin, I said, connecting my laptop to the display, I should mention that the data Mr. Langley presented contains fundamental flaws that would not only fail to deliver the promised results, but could potentially corrupt Apollo Grid's existing systems. We noticed, Sandra said dryly. Please, show us what you actually built. As I pulled up the real architecture, the room leaned forward. This was my moment, not for revenge, but for truth. The elegant solution bloomed across the screen, each component precisely crafted, each connection logical and efficient. This, I began, is how we actually save you $2 million. The room erupted, not in applause or chaos, but in the rapid-fire questions of technical minds recognizing brilliance. Sandra's team leaned forward, studying the real architecture with the hunger of engineers who'd found their solution. My solution, the one Travis had tried to steal but couldn't understand. This distributed processing framework, Marcus Kim pointed at the screen. It's using edge computing to reduce the load. Genius. And the authentication system, another Apollo engineer added, completely eliminates the circular dependencies. How long did this take to design? 4 months, I replied, clicking through the components. The key was understanding that Apollo Grid's data doesn't need real-time processing for everything, only for critical transactions. By creating a hybrid system, we'll take it. Sandra's words cut through the technical discussion like a blade. James Thompson blinked. Just like that? Just like that. She turned to face our CEO. But we have conditions. First, Maddie leads the implementation. Second, she reports directly to us, not through intermediaries who don't understand the technology. Third, her gaze found Travis, who seemed to be shrinking into his chair. We need assurance that our intellectual property will be handled by people who actually comprehend it. Of course, Thompson replied quickly. Whatever structure works best. I'm sorry. Travis stood suddenly, his face flushed. This is all a misunderstanding. The data I presented was preliminary. I was working from an earlier version that recommended 340% growth in Q3. Sandra's eyebrow arched. That contained circular database references that would have cost us millions in failed implementation. The logs show you accessed the files last Thursday night, Patricia Mills added, looking up from her phone. The same files Maddie lost access to immediately after. I was reorganizing the security structure. You were stealing. The words came from Robert Davidson, our CFO. And worse, you were stealing something you didn't even understand. Do you have any idea what would have happened if Apollo Grid had implemented your version? Travis opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. System crash within 72 hours, I supplied helpfully. Complete data corruption within a week. Potential lawsuits in the millions. Billions, Sandra corrected. We handle financial data for half the Fortune 500. The silence that followed was deafening. Through the glass walls, I could see our coworkers pretending to work while obviously watching the drama unfold. Jessica from marketing had her phone out, probably live tweeting the meltdown. Travis. James Thompson's voice was quiet, controlled, and therefore terrifying. Please gather your things. HR will be in touch. You can. I have a contract, which includes clauses about intellectual property theft and gross negligence, Patricia noted. Would you like me to read them? Travis looked around the room, searching for allies and finding none. His gaze landed on me, and for a moment, I saw him clearly. Not the Harvard MBA or the polished presenter, but a man who'd built his career on other people's work, finally caught in his own web. This is your doing, he said to me, his voice low. No, I replied calmly. This is yours. I just made sure you printed all 13 pages of it. He left then, gathering his spiral-bound fiction from the table. The door clicked shut behind him with a finality that echoed through the room. Now. Sandra turned back to me. Let's discuss the real implementation timeline. And your compensation package. Compensation package? I echoed. You didn't think we'd let StratusLink keep you after this? She smiled, a real smile, nothing like Travis's practiced expressions. Apollo Grid needs a chief data architect. Interested? I glanced at Thompson, who nodded resignedly. He knew talent when he saw it, even if he'd been blind to it before. Can I bring my cat? I asked. Sandra laughed. You can bring a whole zoo if this system works as advertised. It will, I promised. The real version always does. 2 hours later, after signing papers that tripled my salary and gave me the kind of equity Travis had only dreamed of, I stood by the printer where this had all started. Someone had left a sticky note on it. Congratulations, Maddie, Derek. I smiled, remembering that morning's satisfaction as Travis printed his downfall, 1 page at a time. Revenge, I'd learned, wasn't about anger or spite. It was about letting people reveal exactly who they were, in full color, on premium 32-pound paper. The printer hummed to life as someone sent another job. I patted it affectionately and walked away, leaving StratusLink behind for good. Behind me. 13 pages of truth lay in the recycling bin, no longer needed. After all, the best code is the kind that runs exactly as designed. Thank you all for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of workplace revenge, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And hey, have you ever dealt with a credit-stealing coworker? Share your experiences in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, document everything, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the power of a well-placed trap.